everybody. Wonderful. So welcome to Face2Face 2024. It is so great to be here with you on this beautiful spring day. My name is Kimberly Olson. I use she, her pronouns. I am the executive director of the New York City Arts and Education Roundtable. I am a pale-skinned white woman with wavy-ish brown hair. I have on a white dress with some blue pattern, and I'm wearing clear framed glasses. And it is my great pleasure and joy to welcome you to our keynote kickoff for Face2Face 2024, Arts in Education Nonprofits, Time to Own Your Power, a conference kickoff with Voulay of Nonprofit AF. For those of you that are new to the Roundtable, we are a grassroots service organization working to improve and advance the state of arts education through professional development, advocacy, online resources, and platforms to connect the arts education field, as well as advocacy. Although we are currently meeting via an online platform, the Roundtable would like to acknowledge that we work and live on unceded lands. Manhattan, or the place that is widely known as New York City, exists on the contemporary and ancestral homelands of the Canarsie, Munsee Lenape, and Wappinger people. These sovereign nations and communities are still thriving here, and we continue to occupy their lands. We'd like to give a moment of respect to them, as well as to the Black and immigrant communities, which have helped build the city we know today. We recognize that all of our pasts, presents, and futures are intertwined, and we'd like to uplift contemporary Indigenous arts organizations that we can all support and learn from. See, my colleague Kinsey has put those in the chat. So I encourage you to learn about these organizations and to support them with donations if possible, and also to highlight any resources or organizations in the chat that you might like to highlight. All right. In addition to that, I encourage you to give a hello in the chat as well. Introduce yourself. We love to know who is here in the Zoom room with us. Let's go to our next slide. Myself and the Roundtable are really coming into our 31st annual conference with gratitude. And as part of that, we are grateful to our sponsors who are pivotal in bringing the annual Face2Face conference to life. We're so grateful for their support of Face2Face 24 and of arts education in New York City. A special thank you to the 92nd Street NY and their Dance Education Laboratory, as well as to our bronze sponsors for their support of our 31st annual conference. And you can see a list of them on this screen here. Face2Face is also made possible by the New York State Council on the Arts with support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature, and by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs. See. Right. And so we are thrilled to be gathering with you virtually and in person over the next 2 weeks. We look forward to hosting almost 600 practitioners in this time as we gather together to think deeply and learn more about arts and education. And before I turn it over to my colleague to really get us started, Alexandra Lopez, I just want to thank the members of our field that have helped put this conference up on its feet. The Roundtable has always been community driven, and we are so grateful for the co-chairs of the conference, as well as our committee members. Their names can be found in the chat for their incredible help and support. I hope you'll join me in showing them some love. Without them, this 31st annual conference would not have been possible. So, a few Zoom reminders before we get going. If you are having trouble with Zoom, please send me or Kinsey, my incredible colleague, our programs director, a private message. We ask that you please keep your mic setting on mute unless you are the person speaking. We also encourage you to use the chat to ask questions or to connect with other folks on the call. We'll have time for Q&A at the end of the session, so we ask that you please hold your questions until then. Please note this meeting includes live ASL interpretation, as well as automatic closed captioning via Zoom. To activate the captions, please navigate to your toolbar and click Show Captions. This also might be under the More button on your toolbar. Please note this session is being recorded and will be made available to registrants after the conclusion of the face-to-face conference. All right, and so with that, I'm going to pass it over to my incredible colleague and co-chair of the Face-to-Face Conference Committee, Alexandra Lopez, to share a welcome from the committee and from our board of directors. Welcome, Alexandra.
Thank you so much, Kim. And good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the New York City Arts and Education Roundtable Board of Directors, I am delighted to welcome you to our virtual conference kickoff, Arts and Education Nonprofits, Time to Own Your Power, with Fu Lei of Nonprofit AF. My name is Alexandra Lopez. I am a board member of the Roundtable and the Associate Director of Education at Lincoln Center Theater. I have curly dark hair with a Cruella-esque spot over my right eye. I am currently winter pale and wearing glasses in front of a bright red wall. With my colleagues, Shobha and Amy, I am co-chair of the 2024 Face2Face conference. I am very proud of the work of the Roundtable staff and conference committee. They have put together yet another brilliant hybrid experience full of varied and thoughtful offerings for everyone in our community. In addition to presenting sessions proposed by Roundtable members, both virtually and in person, we've also curated sessions to address developing areas in the field of arts and education. For example, in response to requests from constituents, we've intentionally crafted a session track for arts administrators for our in-person days next week. We all have different reasons for taking part in this conference, now in its 31st year. For some, this is their face-to-face debut. And for others, this is our yearly opportunity to meet up with dear friends. I invite you to consider what thoughts or questions you have about the work you do. In my mind's eye, I imagine them hopping on one foot in the back of my mind. And with those questions in mind, look through the plethora of conference offerings and see who might touch on those questions and possibly offer insight and invite you to take part in those conversation spaces. We are so fortunate to have so many incredible folks who really know their stuff sharing their talents with us. And in that vein, I am delighted to introduce our keynote speaker, Fu Lei. Fu writes the candid and often funny blog, nonprofitaf.com. Fu is the former executive director of RVC, a nonprofit in Seattle that promotes social justice by supporting leaders of color, strengthening organizations led by communities of color, and fostering collaboration between diverse communities. Fu is a founding board member of community-centric fundraising, a movement that aims to ground fundraising practices in racial equity and social justice. Fu was born in Vietnam. He and his family came to the US when he was 8. He spent several years in Seattle, attending elementary and middle school before moving to Memphis, Tennessee for high school, and then St. Louis for college and graduate school. And he's back in Seattle. He has a BA in psychology and a master's in social work. He is a vegan, a father of 2 kids, and like me, a staunch defender of the Oxford comma. Fu will share some thoughts, and then he will be joined by my colleague, Wolff, the Deputy Director of Dancing Classrooms and fellow Roundtable board member. She will join Fu for a conversation and then facilitate the Q&A with us all afterwards. With that, I turn it over to you, Fu. Can't wait to hear your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. Hi, everyone. This is Vu. I use he, him pronouns, and I am calling in from Seattle, which is on Duwamish and Coast Salish land. I am a mid-aged Asian man with glasses and a pervasive aura of vegan sexiness. It's subtle, okay, but it's definitely there. And I'm just really glad to see you all. And actually, if you can turn on your camera, I know not everyone can, but if you could, it'd be really great because I love seeing people's faces as we talk. And it's okay if you did not shower today or if you're eating an entire pint of Ben and Jerry's ice cream or something. And then we've gotten way too serious about everything. So, you're eating lunch or whatever, that's completely fine. Okay. And I just love seeing you all, and I miss being with my colleagues, and it's been a rough few years. So, thank you for turning on your cameras if you can. Um, Today, I just want to talk about like how awesome you all are, and some of the challenges that we've been facing, and what do we need to do to really unlock our full potential. And that's really about it. A few disclaimers. I have small children, and some of you may know that having a baby is like getting a multi-year federal grant. At first, you're like, yay! And then you're like, this is so much work. And then it changes every year. It's a lot. Okay, so I'm looking forward to the conversation that we have today. I don't claim to be an expert in anything at all. Please feel free to disagree. All right, and I only represent myself. It's easy to say, oh, Vu, he's speaking, so he must represent all people of color or all sexy vegans everywhere or whatever, But this is just one person's opinion. So please feel free to disagree with anything that I say. Also, I will be flashing pictures of baby animals throughout the conversation for no apparent reason. Okay, it's just that Japanese researchers discovered that looking at pictures of baby animals increases your productivity, and they got a grant to study this. They're like the best grant writers ever, and they had an experiment where they had people looking at pictures of baby animals for 10 minutes, and a control group that did not. And guess who was more productive? It was the experimental group. So random pictures of baby animals. Here is, and it's actually unlikely friendship. Okay, this all the animals are like unlikely friends. So that's what we're gonna. Okay. All right. Today we're gonna talk about how awesome you all are, and I just want to start with that because you all are arts artists, arts professionals, and I'm just deeply appreciative of you all. And I don't think that society really appreciates you enough. During the pandemic, everyone was relying on arts and music to just keep themselves together. And yet everyone has been struggling. And then funders are like, well, we're cutting back from arts funding to fund basic needs, as if the arts were not as important as basic needs. And I know there's been some sort of existential crises among arts professionals. And I just want to reaffirm just how important and incredible you all are. And I often think of our sector, the nonprofit sector in general, as like air, whereas other sectors are like food, right? People can see food, they take pictures of food, they call themselves foodies. But the work that you all do, even though people can see arts and hear music and attend theaters and stuff, they don't oftentimes see the work that goes behind what everything that it takes to get the art to be there in the first place. And so the work that you do is often like air, and no one appreciates air until it is no longer there. And that's why we barely have any shows about nonprofit work and all of this stuff. There's so many shows about cake now and baking. And there's no shows about like all the amazing work that we do and how suspenseful it is. Like, are we gonna file that 990 tax form on time? Stuff like that. Very suspenseful. Okay. I was working on nonprofit the musical before the pandemic, and I was thinking about cool characters we could have. For example, the consulting robot. It's like a robot that is also a consultant, and it repeats everything that the staff says, but the board listens to it. And then there's like a development director character, but it's played by a new actor in every scene, and no one talks about throughout the entire musical. Okay, there's cool stuff we can definitely do here. But anyway, we are really awesome. Here is a picture of a little donkey. and a little baby goat, right? Okay. Anyway, we are in this existential crisis right now in our sector, and we cannot go back to the same stuff that we were used to. Okay, we cannot unlock our full power because I think we've been very, very nice as a sector, and I think in many ways we've become very deferential, and we put up with a ton of terrible things, inequitable practices, and it's I just don't want us to go back to there anymore. You know, and well, where we're just struggling for resources and burning out, and we're sitting on crappy chairs that we duct tape together to keep a family of mice from moving into the cushions, and like I don't want us to be there anymore. Your work is way too important for that, so we have to get out of that. And how do we get there? We have to have some brutally honest conversations and uncomfortable conversations with ourselves, and get rid of a bunch of philosophies that we've internalized, and we need to adopt some new philosophies and practices right away. Okay, so I'm going to go through a few of them, and I'm looking forward to the conversation with Eve where we can dive into them a little bit more. Okay, so some philosophies that are burning us out, that is keeping us from reaching our full potential. One, for example, is that there is only so much money to go around, right? Funders say this all the time. Donors say this all the time. There's only so much money to go around. That is a lie. There is so much money. There's like $1.5 trillion just sitting there in foundation endowments and donor advised funds. And meanwhile, all these funders are like forcing us to play this like Hunger Games with one another. And that's what we've been doing. We've been playing this Hunger Games. And we bought into this belief that there's only so much money to go around. We've also bought into the belief that this is other people's money and we should be grateful for any amount of money that we get, any crumbs that we get. When the reality is that so much wealth in this country has been built through inequitable means, including slavery, stolen indigenous land, worker exploitation, environmental degradation, and tax avoidance. And so a lot of the a lot of the funds that we're getting, that we're told to be grateful for, it's like this is not it's not other people's money, right? So I think we have like those are the types of philosophies that I see preventing us from actually uh, achieving our full potential. It's because we bought into them, right? And it leads to terrible things, and it leads to things such as the emphasis on overhead. I can't stand it. I can't stand people are like, we'll give you some money, but you can't spend it on garbage expenses like your staff salaries, like stuff like that. And it is so frustrating and very annoying when and because we're nice, we put up with it, right? But like, can you imagine I don't know, we're like firefighters in many ways. You're like the firefighters, putting out the fires, make sure there's like art and music, which are very important in the community. It keeps our community safe and vibrant, all the work that you're doing. Now, if you're a firefighter and every 3 or 4 steps, someone stops you and says, I want to make sure that the money I'm giving you to like put out the fires is being spent on the water and not the hose. What is your hose to water ratio? Like, this is the type of stuff that we're getting asked all the time. And because we're nice, we're just like, no, 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 no. Someone else is paying for the hose. You're only paying for the water. When our response should be, get the hell out of my way. I have important shit to do. Okay, like this. So I want us to like get out of these philosophies, the philosophies that we're asking for too much and stuff like that, or the bisplaining is what my friend Allison calls it, when a business talks down to a nonprofit as if we had no idea what we're doing. Like, sometimes I talk to business people and they're like, Boo, have you heard of this thing that we do in for profit? It is called accounting. Do you know what accounting is? Well, yeah, we are the best accountants ever, because when you are forced to play funding Sudoku on a daily basis because some donors only want to give you $5 that you can only spend on paper clips on Tuesdays, then yes, you become very good accountants. So it is very irritating when all these corporate people start to like talk down to nonprofit, when we just have so many barriers and challenges and we perform miracles with them every single day. It's pretty amazing. So I don't want them to talk down to us ever again. And another philosophy that we have is that this is all normal. Like all of this stuff, all the barriers that we endure, all the burning out, is all normal. It should not be normal. I don't want it to be our normal anymore. Okay, it should be it's not normal at all. And we need to just stop accepting that it is. So what do we need to do? A few things. I want us to reclaim our imagination, okay? Because I think in some ways we've kind of lost it a bit. We put up our vision on our website and we put up our mission and our values, but then we zone right into the mission. We're like, our mission is to provide like, but all have a vision. Like our vision is like to like make the world better, is to ensure that the world is equitable and our communities are vibrant. And yet, I think in some ways, we kind of forget that. And so we become very incremental, right? We start thinking, oh, this year we serve, I don't know, 50 families or whatever. We get 200 people to attend our concerts or whatever. And then next year, we're like 10% more. So every year we're just like 10% more. Instead of like our vision would be like big and grand, and we need to work backwards. So I'm a big fan of an organization called Creating the Future and its framework around what is the kind of future we want to create. And then we need to work backward from that. And if that means that, our vision is that all kids in New York have access to the arts and poetry and whatever, then we may need to like increase from serving 100 kids this year to like 5,000 kids next year. And what does that actually mean? So the vision is really important. And I also want us to have the audacity of ambition. But before I talk about that, here is a picture of a little pigeon riding on a pig. Unlikely friendships, y'all. Okay. Um, Audacity of ambition, right? I think in many ways, because of all the challenges that we've been dealing with, we've kind of like limited ourselves. We are not as ambitious as we could be. And let's I want to illustrate this so that you really understand what I mean when I say the audacity of ambition. Anyone here has heard of Juicero? Juicero? Anyone? Juicero was a Wi-Fi connected juicing machine that came out of Silicon Valley. Okay, now think about this. It was a Wi-Fi connected juicing machine. It was $700, and you buy these proprietary packets of cut up fruit and vegetables for $7 each, and you place them into this machine, and it squeezes out 1 glass of juice per packet. And Bloomberg did an investigation where they took the packets by hand and squeezed them and got the same amount of juice, but faster. So they wrote about this, and within a few months, Juicero went bankrupt. But before they did, they were boasting that they had $125 million in venture capital. They were boasting that they had like 40 full-time engineers working to design this Wi-Fi connected juicing machine. All right, that is the type of that is audacious, right? $125 million for a Wi-Fi connected juicing machine. Meanwhile, some of you are like, can we please get $19 to ensure all kids in New York have access to theater and poetry? And then people are like, I'll give you $4 that you can only spend on paper clips on Tuesdays. And we're like, oh, thank you. We'll write you a handwritten thank you note. Like this is us. Like I want us to have that audacity of ambition. I want you to add like a 0 or 2 to your budget asks, because the reality is that your work is probably way more important than a Wi-Fi connected juicing machine. So the next time that you're feeling like you're asking for way too much, that like that you don't deserve this money or whatever, like I want you to think about this Wi-Fi connected juicing machine, okay? And then add those 2 zeros to your budget, because your work is way more important. Okay? Have the audacity of ambition. We need way better messaging, y'all. Okay? I think we've been very shy about stuff, and we need to do just a much better job, just really getting out there and being louder. Like, when's the last time any of us have written like an op-ed in our local newspaper talking about the importance of our work or something. We need to be way louder. We're just way too nice here. That's what we need, right? And we gotta change certain things. Here's a baby elephant with a little puppy right there. There we go. Speaking of elephants and puppies, let's talk about philanthropy. Okay, I think we need to change the relationship with philanthropy because I'm getting very tired of it. I'm tired of us spending all this time chasing after dollars and spending all of our time translating the same information from one grant proposal to another because this one funder, all funders want to be snowflake, you know, special, unique snowflakes who want their own snowflake applications and their own snowflake reports and all this stuff, and we just put up with it. And it is very annoying. And I am very tired of it. Okay. So like I think all of us should just have one grant proposal package and that's it. And we just send it to a funder. We don't tailor it for anyone because they don't deserve their own special snowflake grant application. And the more that we just gotta snap out of this. And I'm also tired of funders hoarding 95% of their money in endowments for like future rainy days when it is pouring on our community. And we gotta stop putting up with it all the time. All right. So like I think we've just been way too nice now with the funders, and we need to organize a lot better. And we gotta change the way that we do our fundraising. It's been terrible. Here's a little baby monkey on top of a lion. I don't know how. I wonder if these are like posed. I'm getting very concerned about these baby animals now. But anyway, the way that we've been doing fundraising has been terrible. I don't like it. I don't like this constant sucking up that we've been doing with funders and donors, you know, who are mostly wealthy white people. And like this idea that we need to like suck up to people who should be paying more in taxes, really. It's very irritating. You know, oh, happy tax day, everyone. Please get your extensions in if you haven't filed them, right? But like, I think it's just so annoying. I'm tired of this, like, being trained to constantly suck up to people and to get as much money for our own organization as possible. I don't like the way that we do fundraising. I think this, like, you know, we've been trained to like treat donors as if they were heroes, and we've been trained to use the word "you" in all of our fundraising letters all the time. Like, you did this. Because of you, our community is better. Because of you, our families are stronger. I'm tired of it. And I don't want it to be there anymore. Right. And I kind of liken this like donor centered approach to, I don't know, like husband centered marriages. Right. And I've been a husband and I would love it if every single time I did the dishes or something, my partner would write me a handwritten thank you note. Like, dear Vu, you did it. Because you washed the dishes today, our family is stronger. Our community is better because of you. The children are so grateful that we have you in our family. Please come to this exclusive wine and cheese event just for amazing husbands like you. Like, that's ridiculous. Okay? Doesn't that sound ridiculous? But why is that okay in our fundraising approach? Right? In a good partnership, like everyone should be mutually thankful and grateful for one another. But one person should not be out there like chasing after the other one, constantly thanking them all the time, because it's not a real partnership, and it prevents us from having deeper, more meaningful conversations, such as, you know, where people's wealth came from, and maybe they should be paying more taxes and do reparation for slavery and stolen indigenous land, you know, and stop exploiting their workers. And then, you know, maybe like the arts will be funded and we don't have to struggle all the time trying to scramble for funding and resources and stuff, right? So the way we do fundraising, that has to change. I don't like the way it's being done. Okay, we gotta advocate and we gotta organize more, y'all, and we gotta work on the levers of power. Especially this year, this is an election year. We have to organize way better. We should be focusing on voting, ensuring that everyone is voting. We have to ensure that, you know, like our government represents its people. So getting more progressive women elected into office. We need to protect, you know, voting rights. We got to change the tax code so that rich people are paying their fair share of taxes. And uh, Yeah, all those things. And in order to do all that, we gotta burn a few bridges, y'all. Okay, if we're gonna own our power, we gotta be okay with offending some people. I've been offending a lot of people. I feel like if you're not offending at least 25% of the people you're talking to, then you're probably not doing a good job. Okay, so you gotta burn some bridges, and let the burning bridges be a beacon of light and hope for everyone around you. Okay. So, I'm gonna wind down because I'm looking forward to this conversation with Eve here, but I want to end on a note of appreciation. I know it is easy for me to just click on a Zoom link and flash adorable pictures of baby animals on the screen, and just tell you all the stuff that we need to be doing better. But the reality is that I know how hard it is that you all work, and you are like air, and no one oftentimes appreciates you. They just, they just take it for granted. They take the arts for granted. They take theater and music and poetry for granted, and they don't realize just how empty life would be without all the work that you do every single day. So I just want to let you know that your work matters and it is important. I'll tell you a quick story. Sometimes I think the work that we all do, we don't really see the ripples, right? It's like tossing a rock into a lake at night, and you just don't see the ripples, and you hope that maybe there are some, but you don't see it. I remember when I was running an after-school program, and we were helping these kids who just arrived to the United States, and there was one kid who was just like super frustrated, and he didn't understand English, and he was really good at math, but these were story problems and he just didn't understand it. And we use a lot of art in our program because kids can understand art. Even when they don't speak English, they can still draw and do photography. And it was so vital to all of these kids to feel a sense of belonging when they arrived at our program. And fast forward a few years, I was on my way somewhere, and I was at the airport, and I ran into this kid, and he was like, "Mr. Vu, do you remember me?" And I was like, "I have no idea who you are." He was like, "I was in your after school program, and thanks to you, I was able to graduate from high school, and I went to college. I graduated from college, and now I found a really great job here at the airport. And I just want to let you know that I really appreciate everything that you did for us back then." And I did recall him at that moment. I was like, wow, yeah, it's been so many years. And I didn't think I would ever hear from him again. And I think this is kind of like our work, is that you don't see the ripples that you create, right? And many of the people who are impacted by your work, by the art that you bring into the world, they may not have the capacity or the time to thank you and let you know what you have done for them. But it's there. But it's there. There's so many ripples that you will never see, but they are there. And it was a good reminder for me when I ran into one of our former students and see like what our program did for him, what the arts did for this young man. And then I got an upgrade on my seat. So there you go. It was a ripple. Okay. So you never know. I got a free seat upgrade. That's the whole point of that whole speech, was that you might get a free upgrade on an airplane if you help people. Okay. So just want to let you know that I appreciate you and you are the best. Thank you so much for bringing art and music and light and just all the beauty and stuff that you do every single day to make our world better and more vibrant. And you may not hear it from a lot of the people that you help, and but that's you. You're amazing, and I appreciate you so much. And we're gonna be awesome, and we're gonna unlock our full potential, and we're just gonna kick ass all the time. And here is a picture of a little goat and some baby ducklings. Thanks, everyone. I'm looking forward to conversation with Eve and then some Q&A.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Vu, so much for those words of humor and encouragement and anger, which I think is an important part of this conversation as well. And just energy, I think, to help us kick off this conference. And I'm excited to be here in conversation with you also. Just hello again, everyone. My name is Eve Wolff. My pronouns are she, hers. I am the Deputy Director at Dancing Classrooms, and I'm a member of the Roundtable board. I am a white presenting mixed race lady with curly brown hair and a yellow flowered top and gold hoop earrings. And I am zooming in from the Wappinger lands. And yes, I'm just excited. We're going to dive in. There were so many different things that you covered there, Vu. And definitely as we're chatting, please add, we're going to get to some questions at the end. So if questions arise, please drop them in the chat. We're going to keep track of those. But I wanted to start with, I loved your dishwashing analogy. I think it rang true with many folks, but just that idea of partnership, right? I think partnership is so central to a lot of what those of us in the arts and arts education world do on a daily basis. It's in a lot of our visions or mission statements. It's how we like to work with one another. Many of us are partners with schools, classroom teachers, after school sites, the Department of Education. We talk about our board members as our partners in action, right? But funders who provide a substantial amount of what is necessary to do this work, are they partners? That's a really good question. I think a lot of them say that on their website, grantee partners, right? Or we might list them on our websites as, sponsors and partners. But I don't know that I've ever thought about it that way. So thank you for bringing that up. It is really not often a healthy partnership in being demonstrated between funders and nonprofits. And I think for some folks, probably also our boards are not always healthy partnerships either. But we're so reliant on these systems, right?
Yeah, I'm not so sure if with funders and with a lot of donors that is a true partnership. It's more like a supervisor that you really hate, who doesn't really trust you, and who frisks you at the end of the day to make sure you're not stealing office supplies on your way out. That's basically what. And then they're like, we're like a family at this company or whatever. And that is terrible. And we've been putting up with it for way too long. That's not a partnership. There are power dynamics that we have to acknowledge here. And I think a lot of the power dynamics stem from the internalized messages that we have, again, that we should be grateful. I really dislike this whole attitude of gratitude that we have been internalizing, that a lot of fundraising experts are like, you need to be grateful. You can never thank people enough. Yes, you can thank people enough. Stop thanking people all the time. Okay? Like they should be thanking us at least once a while, you know?
Yeah.
And so this idea that we should be grateful, that this is other people's money, that we should just be thankful anytime they give us a little bit of money and all this stuff, that is not a partnership at all.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get out of this mindset because I think in some ways we have been enabling these terrible partnerships that are not really partnerships, even though we call them partnerships.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's an important part of owning our power, is actually coming into this partnership and saying if I'm an equal partner, then no, I'm not gonna submit quarterly reports for a $5,000 grant. That makes zero sense.
Yeah. And it makes me think too of, I think in some of our other partnerships, a tool we often use are community agreements or partnership agreements, right? We certainly say this to our students when we want to be good partners with each other. What are we collectively agreeing on? What's the trust in the space? And so I wonder how we can, as you talk about leveraging our power, I wonder how we can maybe start to think, what are those broader community agreements, with our funders, with our government, with the Department of Education?
I think we need to organize more, and we got to stop being so shy about this. And I think sometimes we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot in a way, right? We think, for example, with government funder, we're like, well, it's the Department of Education or Department of Arts or Humanities or whatever. And there's no way we can change that because they're just government. They're just naturally very bureaucratic. There's nothing we can do. And that's not true. If anything, because we're paying taxes, then they should be more responsive to feedback than any other grants, right? And I remember like the King County, like the county here had a funder who required quarterly reports, and a bunch of nonprofits were grumbling. They're like, "Well, what can we do? It's a government funder,"
Hmm.
and we decided to actually band together and go to them and saying quarterly reports don't make any sense. There's no information for us to report from one quarter to another. We think it makes more sense to do annual reports. And guess what? They changed it to annual reports. And this is a government funder. So I think we have to do just a better job of just being loud and using the tools and mechanisms at our disposal. With funders, like we've been way too nice now. We've been like very nice to people, asking them, giving them feedback, and the response has always been, "Oh, thank you so much for your feedback." And I got tired of it. And so I launched this thing called crappy funding practices that will call foundations out by name when they have crappy practices. Last week, we called out a foundation that required a notarized report every $60. I mean, every 60 days from its grantees. Every 60 days, grantees had to submit a notarized report. So we called them out by name. Yes, Phil, I'm totally with you. That's awful. Right? So we need to just stop being nice now and start organizing more. So we've been calling out like by name now because I think the public shaming is something we need to start doing. And you all are artists, and many of you are artists and art administrators. You are more creative than other people. Start using your creativity. We actually awarded the Golden Poo Award to one of the funders because they had this thing where I think it was so bad. The grant was so terrible and burdensome that we had to create a special award just for them. Be
Yeah.
creative.
Well, I think one of the great things about the crappy funders arm of nonprofit AF is it helps navigate this power dynamic that you're talking about, right? Because it's very hard if you feel like you're the person or you're the organization getting the grant or not getting the grant and responding to somebody and letting them know you're having difficulty with getting a notarized report every 60 days. That's ridiculous. So being able to have a collective voice, something that can also provide a little bit of a buffer, I think, while these power dynamics are still in place, is important. But also to help acknowledge that power too, right?
Absolutely. Over here at the beginning of the pandemic, like 180 executive directors got together and wrote an open letter to all the funders in the state and said, look, there's a pandemic. We need more money. You need to give out a lot more money. It needs to be multi-year general operating funds, at least 5 years. And you need to sign this pledge saying that you're going to do it. And
Yeah.
guess what? Like, I think like a dozen or so foundations signed the pledge and did increase, but it took like 180 people, organizations banding together. And that seems like it's really hard. And, I know everyone is really stressed out by everything to like do all your work and then organize at the same time. But I think that we have to create more time to organize and to advocate for ourselves.
Yep. Absolutely. And I think too, what's fun and interesting hearing you talk about it, for those of us who are in small nonprofits, especially, or even larger nonprofits, there's someone whose job title and job description is around fundraising or writing the grants. If you're lucky, you even have somebody whose job title includes advocacy work, right? But I think to your point, there's so much more power in the collective. And so, my point of view as an arts administrator, I'm also thinking about how do I work to engage my teaching artist faculty and my programming staff, and as well as our board members, to understand how advocating collectively can work. What are the levers they can be pulling in their daily lives and their daily work, that may not be the grant reports that my development director is writing, but can still be useful. So I know you mentioned voting, for example, as one small thing, and not that we need to get political, but I think you and I were talking earlier about some of the stats out there, right? And I was doing a little research, and arts and culture, in the most latest report just released actually last month, arts and culture was 4.3% of the GDP. The automotive industry is 4.9%.
Wow, almost as big as the automotive industry.
Yes. And the automotive industry comes up in pretty much every local and national political conversation. But how often are the arts part of what we are asking our political representatives about? We maybe, when it comes down to, when we hear the negative of it, the budgets, we all heard about the budget cuts. And, I think there's been a lot of great advocacy coming out about that. But how are we thinking about it and owning that collective economic power in advance?
We definitely do. I mean, our entire sector needs to own it for sure. Like we contribute 900 billion to the economy, which is I think like 6% of GDP, right? We're the third largest sector. We employ 10% of the workforce. And of course, within that is the art sector, which is a substantial portion of the nonprofit sector.
Yeah.
And yeah, we do have really strong economic power that we haven't really been talking about, that we haven't been touting. And unfortunately, in the United States, I believe that we have a system where whoever is loudest wins. When I was organizing around education equity, um, someone gave me advice. One of the activists, elders, gave me this advice, which is like, if you want anything to happen in the school district, you need to get 20 parents to wear the same T-shirt and show up at school board meetings, because that's it. Whoever does that gets whatever they want. And who does it? It's mostly white parents who have the time to do that. And so like our immigrant parents and so on, who just work all the time, they just don't have that. They don't have the time. But all it takes is like 20 of them to wear the same T-shirt and have the same sign and be very loud, and they can get whatever curriculum they want passed, etc. And so that was a major lesson for me. And our sector, again, is full of very nice people. We tend to attract nice, decent, compassionate, and obviously extremely good-looking people. And because of that, we don't organize as much. We don't get angry as much. And I want us to just get angry. Like, I think about what Jan Masaoka of Cal Nonprofit said once, which is like, she said, we have been so good at doing logic models. We've become so professional. We can write logic models and theories of change and personnel manual. But we have trouble now just getting like 50 people to pack a town hall meeting now. And we can't get like 500 people to sign a petition anymore. We can't get like 1,000 people to demonstrate on the street anymore, because we've in some ways lost our organizing power. But that's where our power lies, is in organizing. And we need to reclaim those power and start really using them.
Yeah, and I love your point about how creative we all are too, and really think about, we use creative problem solving all the time in arts education, certainly, and model it for our young people that we work with, right, and for our constituents. But I was just your T-shirt example. I was like, we could make the best T-shirts, but it's very true, being visual, being out there, but also having a really great message too. And I'm just curious on your thoughts of this balance of the kind of need for the getting out there and making noise, but also what you mentioned earlier, we have a vision. we have a mission. We're sort of boots on the ground doing work at the same time. And it feels a little bit like chicken and egg sometimes, right? But what have you sort of seen out there in the nonprofit sector of how folks are balancing those, call to action, flip your table moments versus still getting the work done?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think maybe we need to get out of this sort of dichotomy of like, do you advocacy or do you actually get your work done? When really the advocacy should be a part of the work, right? I would like us to, in some ways, maybe less so for the arts, but like for the nonprofit sector, we need to figure out how to like get this work done in such a way where we can be obsolete, right? Where like the food banks are not as needed anymore. I think for the art sector, it's a little bit different, but maybe it doesn't have to be like all the scrambling for resources. Maybe some of us can actually go out of some of you can not have a job because you won't have to be fundraising so much because the arts are well funded by levies and by our government dollars and stuff. And then many of you can become wedding singers or whatever it is that you can do, right? So or like become artists. um and I think about that. So I think that we have to get out of this binary that is either or, when the reality is that it needs to be both at the same time for everyone across in the sector.
Yeah. Yeah, I think certainly for sustainability too, right? That it really feels like it has become that we can't sort of sit back and let the one organization who's been denoted as the advocacy organization do all the work for us, right? But we
Yeah.
know this in our art making and in our teaching, we work better collaboratively. We do such beautiful work in partnership with each other. So yeah, I think if we can bring that to our advocacy work, to our sort of coalition building as well, we've got a lot to bring to that arena. I just want to remind folks, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We're going to get to questions very soon.
Yeah, or insults or disagreements, if you can leave my personal appearance out of it, it's fine. But otherwise, we can feel free to disagree with anything. Yeah.
So Vu, I love how humor is so clearly a part of your work, and your person, yourself, as well as your work in advocacy and giving voice to a lot of us out there in the nonprofit world. I'm curious, are there ever times you feel like humor isn't working for you?
um I think I like using humor because it delivers the message in a way that a lot of times people can hear. Whereas if you're way too serious, they just have this filter up and they just block it out, right? For example, just a few weeks ago, I wrote a blog post called, "What is a cod piece and should your organization wear it?" And it was talking about like cod pieces, which are like these medieval covers for your some of you are like costume designers and stuff probably, and so you probably know what I'm talking about. But for these medieval outfits, right, like these dudes would have these pieces covering their groin, and after a while they got more and more elaborate and they look silly. Like Henry VIII, if you look at like a picture of him, he has like this ridiculous codpiece on his crotch, right? And it was so silly, but back then that was the fashion. So I wrote a piece like calling "What is a cod piece and should your org be wearing it?" And the whole point was basically, if you're doing these things, you basically should just be wearing a cod piece because you're just so back in medieval ages. You're so archaic in your philosophies and practices, right? Like if you don't disclose salary ranges on your job posting, wear a cod piece because you're stuck in the Middle Ages, or whatever, right? Or if you're a foundation that only gives restricted funding, right? Instead of general operating support, then you should wear a codpiece because you're way behind the times. And people really love this piece because they're like, I had no idea what a codpiece is, and and now I know what a codpiece is, and I think these things that you listed out, yeah, they are very silly and archaic. So being able to use, and this is what you all are good at. Like as artists and art administrators and people working in the creative fields, you are good at using different messages to communicate things in a way that is more visceral to people than other people who tend to be very academic. And I would say like use your superpowers to get that, you know? You can write an op-ed, absolutely. But you can also do like, I don't know, like a sock puppet skit about general operating or like the importance of like poetry or whatever it is that you do, right? You're good at this stuff. Use it. So yeah, but most of the time I find humor to be very effective. And but sometimes, yeah, we do have to be very serious. Um, and we have to kind of balance when that is, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I will say I very much appreciate your nonprofit dating tips. Um, and so if anyone, definitely everyone check out nonprofitaf.com and check out VU and nonprofit AF on the social media. But you know, even just those moments of humor throughout the day, and like your nonprofit dating tips, I like the one recently,
Yeah, and the nonprofit pickup lines,
nonprofit pickup lines,
such
right?
as are your eyes a 35-page request for grant proposal because I can get lost in them forever. Yeah.
Yep, helping find your people for a few minutes. That can be a nice relief, a stress relief from the day. But I agree, there's we deal with a lot of serious stuff sometimes. And I think, you know, those and arts is one of the ways that we best process serious things in everyday life, in history, in our own lives, and as you know, a community, right? That's why we are the air. I love that, by the way, um, because you need it in those moments where you are suffocating, where you are struggling, right? It can be the little breath of life to help you process and get through things. So I think, yeah, in addition to humor, I'm thinking about all the different creative ways we can dig into some of these more serious topics around the sustainability of arts education when, you know, the city's facing massive budget cuts, of how are we continuing to adapt our practices to meet the changing populations in our city schools. You know, there's some big, heavy topics out there, but you know, bringing our creative, joyful selves to them, I think can help. Um, Go ahead, Boo.
Oh no, I agree. We do need to find joy in this work. It can be quite a bit.
Yeah,
And again, you all are, you're like the purveyors of joy and beauty. And use it. Use those powers.
awesome. I think too, one of the other things, just, you know, looking through a lot of your work out there recently, the things you've been putting out there. I know you are a self-proclaimed ruffler of feathers, um, which I'm totally here for. Um, but I think, you know, one of the things that's been making a lot of waves in our industry recently in the nonprofit world, and I think certainly here in New York too, is the continued commitment to DEI in our work. And how, you know, sometimes in New York City, we can feel, and I know not everyone on the Zoom is in New York City, but those of us here sometimes feel a little bit like we're in this lovely progressive bubble. um, or that some of but our colleagues out there in the broader US or in the world might be experiencing different you know, threats to their work, to their inclusivity, to their equity work. And, you know, not to say that we don't see that here as well, but particularly with the national, you know, the Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action. You mentioned equitable hiring practices earlier. And I know there's been a lot out there. So, what would you say we should be thinking about as that work continues right now?
Yeah, DEI has been attacked and I think will be increasingly attacked moving forward because of the Supreme Court's decision on affirmative action. It has emboldened a lot of people to go and challenge a lot of the work we do around equity and inclusion and belonging. And I have been frustrated to see that instead of us doubling down on DEI when it's really needed, a lot of people in our organizations have started kind of backing away. And not just in our sector, but like in other sectors as well. Like I think, for example, it was Black History Month, and one of my friends over here said that her kid's school decided instead of calling it Black History Month, the entire school decided to call it Belonging Month. Belonging Month. It was so terrible. It's like, what the heck is this? You know, and this is because the school is afraid of calling it Black History Month. And it was just so disappointing that this is the school's decision. And I think we're going to see more of that. And I don't want our sector to go into that direction. We should be fully embracing equity, diversity, inclusion. We should be more feisty about talking about controversial things that really, like, we should be bringing to the forefront, like slavery and reparation, you know? And again, stolen indigenous land and things that make people, and white supremacy and things that make people very uncomfortable, because that is one of the visions and the missions of our sector. That is like one of our prime directives. If we're going to use like a Star Trek analogy, right? That is our prime directive, is to ensure that the world is just and equitable. And there is no way we can do that if we are not going to be very bold about talking about things like white supremacy. So I'm hoping that when we are attacked, and we will get more of that, we double down on it. We double down on working on DEI.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. There will continue to be more attacks on it. And I think the fear is real, right? I think there's a fear of, and this goes back to all those sort of power dynamics when you rely, we don't have a seed fund, we aren't sitting here with inside an accelerator that's generated a lot of money that we have available to us already. And so there's this fear of folks pulling dollars, of folks pulling the work. But I think, yeah, the demonstration of commitment to ourselves within the sector, to the young people, and not, I keep saying young people because I work in arts education for youth, but arts education is much broader than just youth. There's folks of all ages who benefit from arts education, but a commitment to our constituents, to our staff, to who we're working with and representing. And I know, yeah, the fear part really resonated with me, in part because of what was happening with Fearless Fund, which I know we were talking about, which is being sued for its foundation arm, is being sued for its grant making, having a grant explicitly for Black women. But that idea of a nonprofit serving its mission for a dedicated group of underserved folks trying to bring equity into a sector, being sued for that is very fear-inducing to folks who maybe do work with targeted communities and do very specific work.
Yeah, it is. It is. I understand. It is fearful, and unfortunately, a lot of our progressive leaning funders have not been taking leadership on these issues. They get terrified, and we kind of take lead from them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to just demand that they really start funding more legal defense funds, that they increase the amount of money that they're giving out on DEI, and for them to be actual partners in doing this work. I remember when I was talking a few years ago with one organization who who's one of the board members said something that offended a right-wing pundit who had a large following on Fox News, and he went on and blasted this organization, and they were getting death threats for weeks. And when they brought this up to their funders, the funders were like, "Oh no, we can't do anything to help you because that's outside of our scope of work." And also we're also kind of scared to get on their radar as well. We started funding you and all this stuff, and it was just so disappointing. This is why I feel like in many ways we like progressives have been way behind on a lot of different issues. It's because when we need to stand there and defend ourselves and advance our values, we become scared and we backtrack
Mm.
and we become pushovers. And I have been yelling at funders to do this, but I think we need to organize better around this.
Yeah. And those values, right? Which I think there's a lot of collective values, certainly. I think across the sector, across the nonprofit sector, the arts education sector. And I think especially, right, even if it's not in our job description, as I mentioned before, it's still, maybe it's in our values, and how are we finding that commonality across that to better organize. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Kinsey, do we maybe want to start turning it over to questions? If we have a few questions in the room. See it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you want to ask some questions, you can drop them in the chat, and thank you to those that have been. You also can use the Zoom reaction feature to raise your hand in Zoom, and we can call on you and come off of mute to ask a question with your voice in Zoom as well.
We do have a question from Amy, who is a fellow WashU alum. Yay! It's so great to be another WashU alum. Hi, Amy. So good to hear from you. Do you want to ask your question off mute? No? You okay? Amy's question is wondering how you balance the call for big, audacious, creative ideas and the real facts of burnout for staff being constantly asked to do more with less. I think we might need to kind of analyze the dynamics behind burnout. Like I think about like what are some of the times in my career where I was burning out and nearly quitting the sector. And oftentimes it wasn't because of the work, but instead it was like all the bullshit that I had to deal with to get to the work in the first place. Right? Like I didn't mind spending 15 hours in one day, like mentoring our fellows or whatever, because it was fun and energizing. That was less of a burnout than spending 3 hours writing a grant report because this funder wanted a quarterly report and they wanted a breakdown and an invoice and receipts for everything that we spent because they didn't trust us. Like that was where the burnout was. So I think we have to kind of understand like what is the burnout and where does it come from? And so I would say, if we start organizing around some of this, then I think in some ways it would address some of the burnout. Like if we actually start organizing to get more funding, then it would help to decrease the amount of work that we do. Maybe if we organize around like stopping all the BS that we have to deal with, then we actually would have more time to do the work that is meaningful, in which case that will actually cut down on the burnout. But I understand what you're saying, Amy, because you're right. Because every time like a speaker come on and is like, here's another thing you gotta do. It's kind of like self-care, right? Like sometimes self-care becomes like another thing that is awful. Like, great, now I have to do yoga? Like that's horrible. Like that's not self-care. I have to wake up early and make green smoothies. That's terrible. I hate green smoothies. Like, I don't want to do that. That's not self-care. So in some ways, like the self-care becomes something that is counter to self-care. So I think in some ways it's around advocacy. It's like, oh great, now you want us to spend more time organizing and more time packing town halls and more time writing op-eds and all of this stuff, right? I understand that when we have so many things that you all have to do. But I think that some investment in that will help to alleviate some of the, it's like an investment in not having to deal with so many of the challenges. So hopefully, I think if we organize right and we prioritize it, then we will have more time to do the more meaningful work that will lead to less burnout, ultimately.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy, for that question. It's a good one. And I know one that comes up. I just want to uplift Becky's comment in the chat. Becky shares, I think that fear to fight back, to challenge, etc., for me comes from the thought of losing resources for our staff, our programs, and the participants. And if we are collectively, quote unquote, air, then are we being responsible leaders, staff, if we make a choice and put people's health at risk? And maybe collective organizing is the answer to this too, because it can feel so scary alone, but together it feels powerful / less risky. I'm not sure I'm asking a question, just voicing a binary stressor I feel 100%. Becky, thank you.
Yeah, I think this is sort of the bind that a lot of our sector is in, right? I think like in other sectors, they could go on a general strike, for example.
Mm.
And oftentimes that works. And we are seeing more unions form in nonprofit. There will be more nonprofit unions forming as we move forward. But it is challenging for us, especially when we do really important work for us, just suddenly stop and saying, you know what, we're just not going to do this anymore. Because even, like the arts that you're doing, it's not just like arts and poetry and so on. Like you're creating a sense of community. You're creating a sense of belonging for a lot of people. You're bringing hope to people. And so it's not easy to just be like, you know what, I'm just gonna just stop. We're just not gonna do any work this year until we get the funding that we need. So because of that, we get taken advantage of because people know we're just not gonna stop serving our communities. And so people in power are like, what are they gonna do? What can they do? And I think that we have to start being more creative in our organizing. Um, and like I said, like in Seattle, like, the EDs got together and started writing this open letter. We've been seeing more people demonstrating. And this is where the creative side of power that you have, like, this is where we need to start doing it more.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I see. Phil, thank you. Phil mentioned, and the advocacy has become a big part of the Roundtable's work over the last several years. And I have to shout out our amazing executive director, Kim Olson, who has led a very large portion of that. At a recent advocacy symposium that we had, several working groups suggested a day without art or a day without art education. That's a possible kind of wake up call moment, lightning rod moment, right? I think that'd be interesting. And I know, right, with our kids, when I see our kids organize days of walkout, as walkout days, young people are finding creative ways to organize and show their voice too. So a couple other questions I'm seeing, a couple similar ones, but in mention of crappy funding practices, Vu, and you had mentioned that gave that example of a government quarterly reports. And I see a couple questions around this. Do you think like it would ever be possible to get more funders to move towards a common application and or a common annual report? And if so, how should we start pushing for this?
Well, look, many foundations have tried this common grant application, and it's never worked.
Right.
it often doesn't work because funders still believe that they should be unique, special snowflakes. And so in the past, what happened was that when they tried a common application, is that they would have a common application and then each funder would ask for like 19 different attachments that are unique, which is totally ruined the whole point of having a common application. So I don't like the common application. I would like the one proposal, which is like, if you think about it, if you're a business, if you're starting up a business, you know, like let's say you decide to sell cupcakes or something, you would have one business plan and
Hmm.
you would go to the banks and ask for loans or whatever, and they would ask for your business plan. They don't go and tell you, well, we want your business plan, but we want your market analysis to only be 500 characters and we want your revenue projection to be 800 characters. We don't do that. Everyone would have one business plan. Why wouldn't we have one grant proposal that would spell out everything that we have, right? And the funders could get among themselves because they ask the same questions. I mean, basically, all grant applications ask the same questions. It's just that the answers need to be in special snowflake formats based on
Yeah.
the whims of funders. And we accept that. So we need to just stop. I don't want us to think about the common application anymore. I want us to think about the one proposal. And I also, but in order for us to really believe in that strongly enough to advocate for it, we have to snap out of the idea of this Hunger Games as the only way for funders to allocate funding. We've accepted this as normal when it really shouldn't be. And it actually is very wacky. Like, I imagine if there's a food pantry, right? And the food pantry goes to hungry families and say, hey, hungry families, we know that you're very hungry, but we only have so much food to give to you because we're saving 95% of the food that we have in our endowments for future famines. So we
Yeah.
only have 5% of the food to give out. So to be fair and objective, what we're going to do is have each of you hungry families write an essay about how hungry you and your families are. And we will give food to the families that wrote the best essay. That makes zero sense because the families that are probably most in need of food are probably not going to be, they probably don't have the strength to write the best essays. And just because you write the best essay doesn't mean that you should be given the most food. That makes no sense,
Mhm.
right? But for some reason, that's what we're okay with that for philanthropy. We're okay with
Yeah.
that for grants. It's like whoever writes the best grant application wins versus which are the
Right.
communities that are most affected by systemic injustice and how do we as the funders get resources to those communities. That is where it should be. That's where we should be pushing for, right?
Yeah.
And we need to be more angry about it.
That's a really great point and a good analogy. And I think to your point about the sort of business plan approach about a common request or a standardized request, because I think those of us in, arts ed, I lovingly, jokingly often refer to arts education as the ugly redheaded stepchild of philanthropy. Right? There are very few funders out there who specifically fund arts education. There are some that fund the arts and there are some that fund education. And good luck to you finding one that you, as the arts education, are going to fit their parameters perfectly. And so, we're constantly doing this contortion act to fit into a funder's parameters and make ourselves sound appealing to them. But in reality, right, what we are doing is so important, so crucial, and worthwhile and worth funding if we could have the chance to tell that story in full, right? We are art makers, we are storytellers, and getting 500 characters to come up with a way to tell a version of something that we think somebody wants to hear versus the best possible business plan, I think is really hard, and a lot of extra effort to, that point about burnout that perhaps we could be avoiding if I think that I saw some things in the chat of, I wonder what the intersection of this sort of advocacy and this funding work is, right? Is it about legislating or a call from some work between government and funders and nonprofits to find, you know, those streams and those points of intersection for us, that we can get rid of all the bullshit, right? And actually just focus on supporting the communities and those of us who are, in the case of New York City, subsidizing the work that the city is required to do for its communities, right? And that we have to justify that in ways that the city government or city government employees aren't required to justify it, or beg for it in a lot of cases, you know, can be very disheartening.
Yep, subsidizing the city. That is what a lot of our sector does, and then putting up with BS. You know, I'm like, why aren't you being grateful that we're subsidizing and doing this job that you should be doing?
Yeah.
You know, and then getting reimbursed like 78 cents for every dollar that we spend. Like, it's absolutely outrageous, and I want us to get way more angry than we have been. We've been just way tolerant.
Yeah.
We get angry.
Yep. And reimburse reimbursed a year or more later. Thank you.
Yes, I remember one time the city was late paying a reimbursable grant by like 4 months, and an AmeriCorps AmeriCorps member, had to like loan my organization some money, like the last $2,000 I had left, so we could run payroll that month.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. I do want to lift up a couple. There's some great, not necessarily questions, but some notes being shared in the chat too, about, you know, wondering if anyone has had some success in speaking with funders about some of these, you know, the need for more responsiveness and realistic expectations. Abby at Collab Theater Group shared, they'd started an initiative maybe 5 years ago, where they did a funder breakfast, to learn about the community, but also to talk about some of the challenges and to let the funders connect with each other. And so some really great conversations came out of that, it sounds like, including letting the funders hear in kind of an unstructured environment, right, outside of the confines of a grant application, letting the funders really hear how they can better support you. And I like what Abby says: if you don't have folks who will listen, find different funders. There are a lot out there, which is true. Can we talk about pensions for artists? Right? That idea of what's an okay thing to have in your budget as a nonprofit, right?
Yeah, let's talk about it. I mean, we don't talk about it because we just don't. But if this is an issue that's important, like, I would say, write an op-ed about it, so that they're like, oh, we should think about pensions for artists, and we should build it into the city's budgets. Like, we should be thinking. And I think we've just been kept, so busy in survival mode that we don't think about these things. I would like for us to think about pensions for artists, but also like universal basic income for everyone. Like, these are things that we should like be a lot louder about.
Yeah. Well, and I know too, a lot of our artists and teaching artists in our organizations are part-time, or gig workers. And so, you know, being a gig worker during the pandemic kind of, right, it changed a lot for a lot of people, and still figuring out how to make that work post-pandemic, but certainly the need for things like healthcare coverage, right, and reliable income. Those are some of the things that I think are still, we were able to really kind of come together as a community and support folks during the pandemic, but afterwards, what have we learned from that? How are we changing things moving forward? I think those questions are still out there. Yeah, I hear some folks, right. You mentioned unions popping up in nonprofits, Vu. Sonnet mentioned, right, why so many museum folks are unionizing. A couple places where that's happening. Sorry, I'm just looking through some more in the chat. I think we are just about at our time. for today. I'm sure we could sit and talk for hours more. And I feel like we're starting to generate some of this energy around some ideas, how we can coalesce and come together. And I am particularly really excited as we head into the rest of the conference, how we can continue to connect with each other to understand our collective power, right, Vu, and figure out where we can take this and put it out there in the world to really get the best that we need for our industry.
Yeah. Thanks so much, everyone. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Eve, for this really great conversation. I know that you have sessions that you're going to attend and things you're going to learn and all this stuff. But I do want you to take just a moment just to appreciate how awesome you are. Right? Because I think with a lot of conferences, it's always about like, what can I do better? What can I learn? What skills can I develop? And so on, which is important. But I think it's important to just take a moment to acknowledge that you are amazing and our sector is incredible. And the fact that we are just so creative that we're able, with all the challenges that we talked about today, we still manage to do incredible work every single day, oftentimes unappreciated by the rest of society. And I am just so grateful to you all for helping to create this kind of world that I appreciate and that I have kids growing up in. And I'm just deeply grateful to you all. And so I hope that our paths will cross again at some point. If you're ever in Seattle, please let me know. I will buy you organic kombucha on tap because that's what we drink over here. It's made out of recycled water bottles. And yeah, I appreciate you all. And look, here's a picture of a snail and a frog on a turtle. Okay, at this point, I think that these photos are staged, and I'm getting very concerned about these animals. But we don't need to think about that, okay? Just appreciate the little baby snail and the frog and the turtle.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Vu, Eve, Alexandra, and of course to all of our participants. Vu, I hope you see some of the love coming your way in the chat as well. Folks calling this an inspiring conversation. Thanks for reminding us to use what we're good at. I think a lot of good charges and challenges for us to take with us, not only as we go into the rest of the conference, but as we continue to do this important work. The advocate in me would be remiss if I did not uplift an advocacy action that you can do right now if you are based in New York City or working in New York City, where you can contact your elected official. Let them know that they must prioritize funding for arts education in our city's budget. That is something you can do in 20 seconds that helps us be able to garner more resources for our community. And as always, the Roundtable is so proud to be able to helped convene and build coalition among our communities so that we can take collective action towards seeing the field that we believe that it can be. So with that, I know it also must be a really great conversation for almost 100 folks to have, or more than 100 folks to have been on this call on what is a beautiful 75-degree day here in New York City. So we hope you'll join us for the rest of our face-to-face conference as well. You can take a look at the full schedule link that Kinsey has just popped in the chat. While this is the end of our keynote kickoff, we hope you will join us tomorrow. We have 2 incredible sessions. I think one of our facilitators might even be on right now, which is great. Hey, Jonathan. At 10 a.m., we have Eastern Time. We have assessment in the drama classroom, a culturally responsive and student-centered approach. And then at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, we have arts education advocacy from the top down with many of our national arts education service organizations coming on for that conversation. So a huge thank you again for joining us. We wish you a lovely rest of your day and look forward to seeing you face-to-face again soon. Thanks all. Bye.